The roar of motorcycles echoed down the narrow street outside, but inside the small cafe, all sound seemed to vanish. The biker leader, a towering man with a leather jacket that had seen decades of road trips, slammed his elbow on the table, rattling the cutlery. He smirked, a grin that dared anyone to challenge him, and fixed his piercing gaze on Chuck Norris. Every head in the room turned. Even the regular patrons who weren't bikers felt the tension. "You think you can take me on?" the biker barked, his voice loud enough to make a few people flinch. He rolled up his sleeve, exposing an arm thick with muscle and tattoos, the kind that told stories of fights won and roads conquered. His friends chuckled, some nudging each other, whispering, "This is going to be fun." Others looked uncertain, a flicker of worry crossing their faces. Cameras clicked as someone pulled out a phone, thinking this might be one for social media. But there was a strange pause in the air, like something was off, like no one could yet read the storm about to unfold. Chuck Norris didn't move at first. He just leaned back slightly, his eyes calm, almost bored, but there was a subtle glint that made people shift in their seats. The biker leader leaned forward, slamming his fist again, the table shaking beneath him. "Come on, old man. Let's see what you got," he taunted. A few bikers laughed, slapping the table. Others held their breath. Something about the way Chuck's face remained unreadable made everyone uneasy. Was he even taking this seriously? Or was he too confident, too calm? The bartender, who had been polishing glasses, stopped mid-motion, frozen. Phones were raised. Some hands trembled with excitement. Every eye followed the two men as they moved into position. The biker leader flexed, preparing to show off his strength. Chuck just placed his elbow on the table, his hand steady, unshaken. The tension became almost physical, thickening the air like smoke. No one spoke, no one laughed. The cafe's usual background chatter disappeared entirely. Everyone in the room felt it, the kind of curiosity that makes time slow down. The biker leader grinned, unaware of what he had just unleashed. Chuck Norris, silent and composed, seemed harmless. But the questions lingered in everyone's minds. Who would move first? What would happen? And more importantly, did anyone truly understand the quiet strength sitting across from the biker leader? The cafe was small but crowded, tucked at the edge of a dusty highway where bikers often stopped after long rides. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting streaks across the room, highlighting the polished leather jackets and chrome chains. The walls were lined with old motorcycle memorabilia, rusted license plates, faded posters, and photos of bikers from decades past, giving the place a rugged, lived-in charm. The air smelled faintly of espresso and motor oil, a mixture both strange and oddly comforting. In one corner, the biker leader sat at the largest table, a solid slab of oak scarred with years of use. He was broad-shouldered and intimidating, the kind of man who seemed carved from the road itself. His leather jacket was worn but polished, tattoos crawling up his arm like maps of his life's adventures. Scars peeked out from under the sleeve, each one hinting at fights won and challenges survived. He grinned at the other bikers, who had gathered around, their faces lit with excitement and curiosity. Some raised their eyebrows, others muttered under their breath, speculating about the man sitting across from him. Across the table sat Chuck Norris, calm and composed, almost eerily still. The sunlight caught the edge of his hair, giving him a faint halo-like glow, though his eyes, steady and sharp, were far from gentle. There was no tension in his shoulders, no bracing, no dramatic gestures. He simply rested his elbow on the table, his hand ready but relaxed. A faint smile tugged at his lips, not arrogance, but a quiet confidence that made those who knew him realize he was far stronger than anyone in the room guessed. The contrast was striking. The biker leader leaned forward, chest out, ready to dominate. His friends cheered him on, clapping hands on the table, some whistling, others joking. "He's got this," one whispered. "No way anyone can beat him." The biker smirked, enjoying the attention. He flexed, showing off the power in his forearm. The veins stood out, and every muscle seemed to hum with energy. For him, this was more than an arm wrestle, it was a statement of strength, a demonstration of dominance. Chuck, in contrast, radiated calm. He didn't flex or pose. He didn't play to the crowd. He simply looked at the biker leader, unflinching, with an expression that made even the boldest bikers uneasy. It was the kind of gaze that seemed to measure more than muscle, that saw intent, character, and patience. Everyone in the cafe could feel it. The bartender paused mid-polish. The waitress froze in the doorway, tray in hand. The usual background noise, the hiss of the coffee machine, the clink of cups, had disappeared. Some bikers whispered among themselves. "Is he serious?" one asked. "He doesn't even look like he's trying." Others shook their heads, skeptical. Yet curiosity kept them leaning forward, straining to see what would happen. Even the biker leader felt a flicker of doubt. He had faced tough opponents before, but there was something in the stillness, the calm control of the man across from him, that made him pause, just for a heartbeat. The room seemed suspended in time. Chairs scraped slightly as people shifted, phones were raised to capture every second, and even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to hold its breath. Everyone in the cafe, bikers, regular patrons, even passers-by peeking through the glass, was waiting for a signal, a move, any hint of what might happen. And yet, Chuck Norris didn't rush. He didn't glare. He didn't flex. He simply waited, like a calm river ready to flow when the moment came, letting the tension build naturally, without a word. The biker leader, unaware of the quiet storm he was about to face, tightened his grip, rolling his shoulder in preparation. The room was electric with anticipation. Everyone felt it. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, and no one would be able to look away. The biker leader tightened his grip on the table, rolling his wrist and flexing his forearm like a predator preparing to strike. His friends cheered him on, slapping the table and shouting encouragements. "Show him who's boss," someone yelled. The energy in the cafe surged. It was no longer just an arm wrestle, it had become a contest of wills, a test of confidence, a spectacle that everyone wanted to witness. Chuck Norris remained perfectly still, his elbow planted firmly on the table, fingers relaxed around the biker leader's hand. His calmness was almost unnerving. There was no strain in his face, no flash of effort in his muscles, just a quiet, unwavering presence. The biker leader's grin faltered for just a moment. He had seen challengers falter under pressure before, but this was different. Chuck wasn't reacting in the way anyone expected. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "Is he holding back?" one biker murmured. "Or does he even need to?" Another shook his head, eyes wide. "I don't think anyone's ever faced him like this." The cafe felt smaller, the walls pressing in with anticipation. Chairs creaked as people shifted forward, leaning closer to witness the showdown. Even the bartender, usually unflappable, paused mid-motion, hand frozen over a glass. The biker leader's arm twitched, testing the resistance. Chuck's hand didn't budge, not a millimeter. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on Chuck's lips, like he was quietly amused by the bravado of his opponent. The biker leader's friends exchanged nervous glances, sensing that the confidence they had felt moments ago was beginning to waver. Some tried to hide it, but the tension was contagious. Every eye in the cafe was locked on that table, every mind racing with questions. Who would give in first? How strong was this man sitting calmly across from the biker? The biker leader leaned in closer, pressing harder, his muscles taut and veins standing out under the skin. Sweat began to glimmer along his brow as he realized this was not going to be an easy victory. Chuck's posture remained relaxed, his breathing steady. The quiet strength radiating from him was like a wall, impossible to break, unshakable, and completely controlled. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. The sounds of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the hum of conversation, faded into nothing. All that existed was the table, the locked hands, and the silent question hovering in the air. Who would win? Around them, the crowd held their collective breath. Phones were raised, fingers hovering over screens, ready to capture the moment. A waitress leaned against the counter, eyes wide, unsure whether to step back or watch. Even the biker leader's closest friends grew quiet, sensing that the challenge had taken a turn they didn't anticipate. The confidence that had radiated from their leader was starting to crack under Chuck's calm, unyielding presence. And then the subtle shift began. The biker leader pushed harder, testing the limits of Chuck's grip. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, imperceptibly at first, the biker's arm trembled. His eyes widened. A whisper spread through the cafe. "He's moving." But Chuck didn't push. He didn't show off. He just applied the perfect amount of steady pressure, a quiet reminder that strength wasn't always loud. The biker leader's grin faded completely. His friends gasped softly, unable to hide their shock. This wasn't what they had expected. They had prepared to witness a simple display of brute force, and instead, they were watching something far more impressive: the calm, controlled mastery of a true champion. The cafe, once filled with the hum of casual chatter and the clatter of cups, had transformed into a theater of suspense. Every patron, biker, and passerby who had wandered in out of curiosity now leaned forward, eyes glued to the table. Phones hovered in midair, poised to capture every second of what had become more than a mere arm wrestle. It was a study in tension, patience, and quiet dominance. The biker leader's friends exchanged uneasy glances. Some had started cheering earlier, confident that their leader would crush Chuck in moments. Now, they shifted nervously, whispering to one another. This isn't what I expected," one muttered, voice barely audible over the silent anticipation. Another simply shook his head, leaning on the table, jaw tight. The smug grin that had decorated the biker leader's face only moments ago was replaced with the faintest trace of uncertainty. A waitress, tray still in hand, had frozen in the doorway. Her eyes were wide, not just at the strength of the men but at the aura surrounding Chuck. He didn't need to flex or shout. His calm, composed presence seemed to bend the very energy of the room. Even the clatter of dishes in the kitchen had faded into background white noise, absorbed by the thick, almost tangible tension that hung over the cafe. Every subtle movement was amplified in this charged atmosphere. The biker leader's muscles flexed as he pressed harder, veins straining. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, catching the light like a small signal of effort and concern. Chuck's hand remained steady, unyielding, yet impossibly relaxed. There was no struggle on his face, no exertion. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the biker's effort, creating a silent narrative that no words could capture. The murmurs of the crowd began to grow, soft at first, then louder, like the building of a storm. "He's not even trying," someone whispered. Another voice countered, "No, he's doing it differently. Look how steady he is." A few bikers leaned forward, fists resting against their chins, eyes narrowing as they tried to decipher the subtle dynamics unfolding before them. The air was thick with anticipation, a mix of admiration, disbelief, and curiosity. The biker leader's friends tried to regain their composure. "Come on, man, push harder," one shouted. But their encouragement fell flat against the weight of the moment. Chuck's hand didn't budge. He simply absorbed the pressure, redirecting it subtly, like water flowing around a rock. The crowd noticed. Heads tilted, eyes widened, some holding their breath. Even the cafe's regular patrons, initially uninterested in the spectacle, now found themselves leaning closer, caught in the web of curiosity and tension. Phones clicked incessantly, though no one dared break eye contact. People whispered, speculating, "How is he doing it? Why doesn't he look strained? Could anyone else stand up to this calm, measured force?" Children peered over their parents' shoulders, sensing that something unusual was happening even if they didn't understand the full weight of it. Every reaction fed into the suspense, making the moment stretch longer and more intense. Then came the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that made everyone gasp quietly. The biker leader's arm trembled, just slightly. He frowned, blinking rapidly, trying to reassess what he had thought was certain victory. Chuck's steady grip didn't falter. His calm presence seemed to radiate through the cafe, commanding attention, demanding respect without a single word. The biker leader's friends went silent. Even the loudest bikers, who had been shouting encouragement just minutes ago, now leaned forward, eyes wide, fascinated. The room was electric. The tension was no longer about the arm wrestle, it was about the story unfolding in real time, the revelation that strength wasn't always about aggression, speed, or brute force. The cafe had become a living, breathing character, reacting to every slight movement, every pause, every subtle shift. Every person in the room could feel it in their bones. Something extraordinary was happening, and they were witnessing it firsthand. By now, whispers had transformed into awed silence. The realization began to spread. This wasn't just a contest of muscle. This was a lesson in control, in quiet dominance, in the power of presence. Every eye remained locked on the table, every mind racing with curiosity and admiration. No one dared blink. No one dared move. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next, fully aware that the answer would be unforgettable. For what felt like an eternity, The biker leader pushed against Chuck Norris with all his strength, muscles coiled like steel springs. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his jaw clenched, eyes darting with a mix of determination and disbelief. He had expected this to be a simple victory, a moment to boast, a story to tell his friends later. But something was off. Chuck's hand didn't yield, didn't strain, didn't twitch. He remained calm, steady, and unshakable, like a rock in the middle of a storm. The crowd in the cafe held its breath. The tension that had been building for minutes now seemed almost tangible, thick enough to cut through. Every whisper, every clink of a glass, every nervous shuffle of a chair was amplified by the anticipation. Some bikers leaned closer, gripping the edge of the table. Others clasped their hands together, as if silently praying for a glimpse of what would happen next. Even the bartender and waitress were frozen mid-motion, unable to look away. Everyone knew that in this moment, the ordinary rules of strength, competition, and expectation no longer applied. The biker leader gritted his teeth and tried one more surge of effort. His veins pulsed under his skin, his arm shaking slightly under the force he applied. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. His friends cheered him on, but their voices sounded distant, swallowed by the hush that now ruled the room. And then, almost imperceptibly, a shift began. Chuck's calm presence, his quiet control, seemed to press back against the biker's effort, not with raw force but with perfect, measured resistance. The biker leader's expression changed from determination to confusion. His arm, which he had assumed would bend his opponent within seconds, trembled as he realized it wasn't moving Chuck at all, at least not in the way he expected. Chuck's hand applied just enough pressure to subtly redirect the biker's own strength, turning it against him without ever showing strain. It was like watching water flowing around a boulder, unstoppable yet gentle. The biker's friends gasped, leaning forward, whispering to each other in disbelief. How is he doing that?" one asked quietly, eyes wide. And then, the inevitable happened. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the biker leader's arm began to move, but not in the way anyone anticipated. It was as if the sheer calm and mastery of Chuck's strength had shifted the contest entirely. The biker's hand inched backward, sliding down, and then down further, until finally, with a subtle, quiet movement, his arm touched the table. The room erupted, not in mockery, not in drama, but in stunned, awed silence. The biker leader leaned back, breathing heavily, eyes wide as he processed what had just occurred. Chuck Norris didn't slam the table. He didn't flex, or raise his hands in victory. He simply smiled, the faintest curve of lips that radiated confidence and respect. He had revealed his strength not through aggression or showmanship, but through calm mastery, patience, and quiet control. The biker leader, chest heaving, finally looked at Chuck, nodding slowly, a smile breaking across his face, not of defeat, but of respect. In that moment, the lesson was clear. True strength doesn't shout, it endures. It doesn't need to dominate the room, it simply exists, quietly and powerfully. The cafe seemed to exhale collectively. Phones lowered, jaws unclenched, and every single person in the room absorbed the spectacle. Even the loudest bikers, who had once been brash and confident, now sat in awe, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. They had witnessed not just an arm wrestle, but a demonstration of discipline, calm, and controlled power. Everyone felt it, the subtle weight of the lesson that had just unfolded before them. The biker leader extended his hand, this time in genuine admiration. "I didn't expect that," he said, his voice sincere, tinged with awe. Chuck clasped it, shaking firmly, silently acknowledging respect. The friends, initially ready to mock, now nodded, their expressions reflecting an unspoken truth. Sometimes, the quietest, calmest presence holds the greatest power. As the crowd began to murmur, slowly returning to movement, the air was still charged with curiosity and amazement. People replayed the moment in their minds, trying to grasp the full extent of what they had just witnessed. The lesson lingered in the air. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's control. Sometimes, it's the ability to let others think they're in command while quietly guiding the outcome. And with that, the cafe returned to its usual rhythm, but nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Everyone had been reminded, in one short but unforgettable moment, that true power doesn't need to prove itself, it simply is. The cafe had slowly returned to its usual hum, the soft clinking of cups, the occasional cough, the hiss of the espresso machine, but the air still felt different. What had started as a challenge between two men had transformed into something far more significant. The biker leader, once brimming with bravado, now leaned back, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. His friends, who had initially cheered for strength and dominance, now sat quietly, reflecting. And the patrons, some who had come for coffee, others simply passing by, all carried a spark of curiosity and admiration that lingered long after the arm wrestling match had ended. It was a moment that transcended mere muscle or physical prowess. Everyone present had witnessed a truth that is often overlooked in daily life. True strength is not loud, it is quiet. It does not seek attention, it earns respect. Chuck Norris, through nothing more than calm presence, patience, and controlled action, had demonstrated a lesson that words alone could never convey. Strength is not just the ability to overpower others. It is the wisdom to know when and how to act, the restraint to remain composed under pressure, and the subtle skill to guide events without unnecessary force. The biker leader now understood this in a way that went beyond casual observation. He had come into the cafe expecting to showcase dominance, to impress his friends, to prove that he was unbeatable. But the encounter had taught him that there is a difference between being strong and truly powerful. Strength can intimidate, impress, or even awe, but power, real power, lies in calm confidence, in discipline, and in humility. Chuck didn't need to shout, flex, or display aggression. His mastery was quiet, effortless, and precise. That is why the biker's initial confidence faltered. He had never encountered strength in that form before. The patrons, too, absorbed the lesson in different ways. Some nodded to themselves, realizing that in their own lives, they often confused loudness, speed, or forcefulness with real strength. They thought that to succeed, to win arguments, or to gain respect, they needed to be the loudest, the fastest, or the strongest in the obvious, demonstrable sense. Yet the day's events had challenged that assumption. It was a subtle but profound shift in perspective. Sometimes, the most impactful actions are quiet, measured, and deliberate. Even the biker leader's friends had learned from the encounter. The initial excitement, the desire for spectacle, had given way to a deep respect for the principle they had just witnessed. They realized that in life, as in this arm wrestle, rushing to assert dominance or relying purely on force can only get you so far. The quiet, patient approach, calculated, controlled, and confident, yields results that are both lasting and profound. Chuck's display was not merely physical, it was philosophical. It was a lesson in character as much as it was in strength. And it didn't stop there. The subtle ripple effect of that encounter spread beyond the table. Even casual patrons, watching from the sidelines, were inspired. Some silently reflected on their own challenges, conflicts at work, personal goals, or struggles with patience and self-control. They understood, without Chuck saying a word, that the power of composure, the mastery of restraint, and the wisdom to act with intention are qualities that can be applied to every facet of life. Strength is not only what you show, it is how you carry yourself, how you respond under pressure, and how you influence others without force. By the time Chuck stood to leave, the room had changed. There was laughter again, voices rising, yet it was no longer the same casual atmosphere. It was infused with reflection, awareness, and a sense of respect that could not be faked. People carried with them a lesson that would last far longer than any single arm wrestle, that true influence is subtle, that real power does not need to assert itself constantly, and that the calmest presence in a room can sometimes achieve more than the loudest or most forceful. The biker leader offered a final nod, a silent acknowledgement of what he had learned. Chuck smiled, clasped his hand in quiet camaraderie, and walked away, leaving behind more than just a story of an arm wrestle. He left behind a lesson, one that would echo through the minds of everyone present. Strength is not what everyone sees. True power is what they feel. And that, in the end, is far more impressive than any display of brute force. In reflecting on that moment, one could see that this lesson applied to life itself. In relationships, in work, in challenges large or small. Patience, composure, and quiet confidence often create outcomes far beyond what flashy or aggressive methods can achieve. Those who understand this, who cultivate calm mastery in themselves, wield a force that is unseen yet undeniable. And sometimes, all it takes is a single encounter, an arm wrestle, a moment of patience, a quiet display of skill, to teach a lesson that resonates far beyond the room in which it occurred. As Chuck Norris stepped away from the table, leaving the biker leader and the crowd behind, a hush fell over the cafe. But this wasn't the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, It was the heavy, resonant quiet of minds processing what they had just witnessed. Every person in that room, whether biker, patron, or passerby, felt the ripple of something greater than a simple arm wrestle. They had watched a quiet demonstration of power, mastery, and discipline, and it had left them thinking, reflecting, and questioning. The biker leader, chest still heaving, leaned back in his chair. His friends, initially loud and confident, now sat in reflective silence. They had come expecting a display of dominance, a spectacle that would entertain them for a few minutes. Instead, they had experienced a subtle lesson in humility, patience, and true strength. The biker leader ran a hand over his face, feeling the tension ebb from his muscles but the realization settle in his mind. He had underestimated not only Chuck Norris but the concept of strength itself. True power was not measured in speed, force, or noise. It was measured in restraint, composure, and wisdom. Around the cafe, murmurs began to grow, quiet at first, then louder, as people processed what had happened. Patrons discussed the subtle cues, the calm confidence in Chuck's eyes, the way he absorbed and redirected force rather than clashing with it, the way he made victory seem effortless yet deliberate. Some compared it to moments in their own lives, times when they had rushed into confrontation or relied on aggression rather than patience and strategy. Others shared a quiet awe, acknowledging that witnessing someone like Chuck Norris in such a controlled, masterful way was a rare and almost humbling experience. Phones had been lowered, but the memories remained vivid. Clips and images captured during the arm wrestle would circulate online, but no video could fully convey the lesson that hung in the air. Every subtle shift, every fraction of movement, every quiet, unyielding expression of control had communicated more than words ever could. People were learning, silently but powerfully, that influence comes not from dominance but from mastery, that strength is most impressive when understated, and that respect is earned through calm confidence rather than loud display. Even the biker leader's friends began to nod in quiet agreement. They had cheered, they had joked, they had expected to see an easy victory, but now they understood that Chuck's calm, measured approach had outclassed not just raw strength, but ego and impatience. They began to reflect on their own lives, recognizing moments when they had relied on force rather than composure, when they had rushed to prove something rather than act with quiet mastery. It was humbling, eye-opening, and, in a way, inspiring. Outside the cafe, engines roared, but the energy inside had shifted. Conversations now carried a tone of reflection. Even the passers-by who had stopped to watch through the windows felt a subtle change. They had been spectators to a moment that transcended sport or spectacle, a moment that taught an enduring truth about life itself. Real power is not always visible, but it is felt deeply. Real influence is not loud, but it commands attention. Real strength does not need to dominate, it guides, it steadies, and it inspires. And as Chuck Norris walked toward his bike, his movements calm, deliberate, and confident, it became clear that the lesson extended far beyond the cafe walls. Every person who had witnessed the event carried a story, a reflection, a spark of understanding. It wasn't about winning an arm wrestle, it was about what it meant to be truly strong, truly disciplined, and truly respected. The biker leader had learned humility. The friends had learned reflection. The patrons had learned observation. And the viewers, those who would later watch clips online, would have the opportunity to carry the lesson into their own lives, to consider how they wield power, respond to pressure, and command respect. So, what does this mean for you? In your own life, are you relying on force or showmanship to get what you want? Are you rushing to assert dominance, or are you cultivating calm mastery and confidence? Think about your own arm wrestles, the challenges, confrontations, or competitions that test you every day. What could happen if you approached them with the quiet confidence that Chuck demonstrated? What doors might open, what conflicts might resolve, and what respect might you earn simply by staying calm, composed, and deliberate? Now it's your turn. Reflect on this moment, the tension, the silent lessons, and the subtle victory. Comment below. What part of this encounter inspired you the most? Was it the biker leader realizing humility, the crowd witnessing quiet power, or the subtle mastery Chuck displayed? Share your thoughts. And if you believe that calm, disciplined strength is more powerful than loud, aggressive force, type respect in the comments. Remember, the lesson doesn't end here. Strength, patience, composure, and quiet mastery are tools you can carry into every part of your life, whether at work, with friends, in challenges, or even in moments that seem small and ordinary. It's easy to forget that the greatest impact often comes not from noise, drama, or aggression, but from presence, calm, and mastery. And just like everyone in that cafe, you can witness, reflect, and carry forward the power of these lessons. The engines outside revved once more, but inside, the silence was different now. It was reflective, aware, and respectful. People had learned, had felt, had understood that real power doesn't need to announce itself, it simply is. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of all. Strength is quiet, influence is subtle, and mastery is timeless. So take a moment. Think about your challenges. Think about your strength. And remember, the quietest presence in the room can often achieve the most extraordinary outcomes.